The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide Eleanor Fairchild's life into before and after, its stark words cutting through the autumn air of Silverdale like a blade through silk. Family lost in fire, stop, 12 children. Survivors stop arriving tomorrow, stop, prepare accordingly, stop. Ellie's hands trembled as she read the message for the third time, her throat working soundlessly around words that would never come, her mind reeling with the magnitude of what lay ahead. At 26, she had built a careful, quiet life as the territory's only mute teacher, communicating through graceful gestures and expressive writing that had won the hearts of her students and the respect of their parents. Her small cottage behind the schoolhouse had been her sanctuary, filled with books and lesson plans and the blessed silence that others pitied, but she had learned to treasure. Now, in the space of a few printed words, that sanctuary was about to become something else entirely. A refuge for 12 orphaned souls who would need more than she had ever imagined possible to give. The tragedy that had claimed her brother Thomas, his wife Mary, and their farmhand families in a barn fire had left behind a collection of children ranging from 4-year-old Emma, barely more than a baby herself, to 16-year-old Mary, named for her lost mother and now thrust into premature adulthood. Ellie had met them only twice, brief visits when travel allowed, but she remembered bright eyes and laughter, the kind of chaos that came with large families bound by love rather than mere circumstance. How could she possibly care for 12 children when she couldn't even call their names aloud? How could she comfort their tears when her own voice had been stolen by the fever that had nearly killed her at age 7? The questions circled in her mind like vultures, feeding on every doubt and fear she'd carefully buried beneath years of determined independence. As she stood in her tiny parlor, surrounded by the neat order that would soon be replaced by the beautiful chaos of childhood, Ellie felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a mountain. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, a fierce, protective love that transcended words, and a determination that had carried her through every challenge she'd ever faced. These children were family, and family meant everything, even when everything felt impossible. From his sprawling ranch house 3 miles away, Alexander Sterling lowered his spyglass and felt his heart constrict with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He'd been watching the schoolteacher for months now, drawn by her grace and strength, fascinated by the way she commanded respect and affection without ever speaking a word. Now, as he observed the preparations being made at the cottage, additional beds being delivered, neighbors arriving with supplies, he realized that the quiet woman who had captured his attention was about to face a challenge that would test every ounce of courage she possessed. What would you do if you witnessed someone facing an impossible situation with nothing but love and determination? Alexander Sterling had built his fortune through careful observation, strategic thinking, and the ability to recognize opportunity, where others saw only obstacles. As the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, he was accustomed to solving problems with money, influence, and decisive action. But the situation unfolding at the schoolhouse presented a different kind of challenge, one that required delicacy, discretion, and an understanding of pride that ran deeper than practical need. From his daily rides past the cottage, Alex could see the overwhelming nature of Eleanor's circumstances. 12 children of various ages had indeed arrived, brought by a grim-faced territorial official who departed as quickly as possible, leaving behind a chaos that would have daunted anyone. Yet as Alex watched through his spyglass, he saw something remarkable happening. Eleanor moved through the crowd of children like a conductor leading an orchestra, her hands speaking in graceful gestures that somehow brought order to confusion, comfort to tears, and hope to despair. The older girls, Mary and Sarah, had immediately stepped up to help with the younger ones, while the boys formed a protective circle around their new guardian. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and inspiring all at once, but Alex's trained eye also saw the practical problems that love alone couldn't solve. The cottage was too small, the supplies inadequate, the financial burden impossible for a teacher's modest salary. Within a week, Eleanor would be facing choices no one should have to make: which children to keep, which to send away, how to divide a family that had already lost everything. That's when territorial official Harold Grimsby arrived with his clipboard, his official seal, and his complete lack of understanding about what family truly meant. "Miss Fairchild," he announced in the clipped tones of bureaucratic authority, "I've reviewed your situation, and it's quite clear that you're unable to properly care for 12 children. I have arrangements made with various institutions and foster families throughout the territory. The transition will begin immediately." Alex watched Eleanor's face pale as she shook her head frantically, her hands moving in desperate gestures that Grimsby ignored with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never learned to listen with anything but his ears. The children clustered around their aunt like chicks around a mother hen, little Emma clinging to Eleanor's skirts while the older ones formed a protective barrier. "This is not a matter for discussion," Grimsby continued. "You cannot speak to, advocate for these children. You cannot provide adequate housing, and your financial resources are clearly insufficient. The territory has a responsibility to ensure these orphans are properly placed." It was then that Alex made a decision that would change everything. He'd spent months admiring Eleanor Fairchild from afar, respecting her independence, and wondering if a woman of her strength and grace could ever find room in her life for a man like him. Now, watching her face the threat of losing her family to bureaucratic indifference, he realized that some things mattered more than pride, privacy, or the careful courtship he'd been contemplating. Some things required immediate action, regardless of consequences. That evening, as Eleanor sat surrounded by 12 frightened children, trying to explain through tears and gestures that they might be separated, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Sam Rivers, Alex's foreman, holding an envelope sealed with wax. Inside, in elegant handwriting, was a letter that would offer hope where there had been only despair, and begin a love story that neither Alex nor Eleanor had seen coming. The letter was written in a careful, respectful hand that spoke of education and genuine concern, its words chosen with the precision of someone who understood both the power of language and the importance of dignity. "Dear Miss Fairchild," it began, "I write to you not as a stranger, but as a neighbor who has witnessed your extraordinary grace under impossible circumstances. I am prepared to provide whatever financial assistance is necessary to keep your family together, with no conditions or expectations beyond the knowledge that 12 children will grow up loved and cared for as they deserve. Please accept this aid in the spirit it is offered, not as charity but as an investment in the future of children who have already proven their resilience and worth." Eleanor read the letter 3 times, her heart hammering against her ribs as she tried to process this unexpected salvation. There was no signature, only the notation that Sam Rivers would return the next morning for her response. The offer seemed too good to be true, yet the tone was sincere, the resources apparently real, and the timing nothing short of miraculous. That night, as she tucked 12 children into beds that crowded every corner of her cottage, Eleanor found herself wondering about the identity of her mysterious benefactor and what kind of person would offer such generous help to a virtual stranger. The next morning brought more than just Sam Rivers and her answer. It brought the beginning of a transformation that would touch every aspect of their lives. The anonymous assistants arrived with remarkable efficiency and thoughtful planning. Additional rooms were quietly added to the cottage, expanded pantries stocked with food, a small schoolroom built where Eleanor could continue teaching while keeping her family close. Everything was done with discretion and taste, improving their circumstances without overwhelming their dignity. Eleanor's teaching salary was supplemented by a modest trust fund established for the children's care, administered through the territorial bank with paperwork so legally sound that even Grimsby couldn't challenge it. Most remarkably, the older children began receiving educational opportunities that had seemed impossible before. Mary was offered a position as assistant teacher, while the boys found apprenticeships that would give them valuable skills. Eleanor threw herself into her expanded role with the determination that had carried her through every challenge she'd ever faced. She established routines that gave structure to chaos, created educational activities that kept 12 minds engaged and growing, and somehow managed to provide individual attention to each child despite the overwhelming demands on her time. Her cottage became a model of organized efficiency, with chore charts and study schedules and family meetings conducted entirely in the graceful sign language she taught them all. The children flourished under her care in ways that vindicated every decision she'd made. Little Emma learned to read sitting on Eleanor's lap during evening story time, while the older children took on responsibilities that prepared them for successful adulthood. Most importantly, they remained together, growing stronger as a family unit, rather than being scattered to the winds of bureaucratic convenience. From his distant observation post, Alex watched this daily miracle with growing admiration and something deeper, a love that had grown from respect into genuine affection for a woman who embodied everything he valued most. Eleanor Fairchild had proven that strength came in many forms, that love could indeed conquer overwhelming odds, and that some people were simply born to make the world better through their presence in it. Life settled into rhythms as natural and essential as the turning of seasons, built on the foundation of love, routine, and the kind of hard work that created character in both children and adults. Eleanor's cottage had transformed from a teacher's quiet refuge into the beating heart of a community, where laughter mingled with lessons and chaos was tempered by the gentle authority of a woman who had learned to lead through example rather than words. Each morning began with the carefully orchestrated ballet of getting 12 children fed, dressed, and ready for their various activities, a process that Eleanor managed with the efficiency of a general and the tenderness of a mother. The older girls had become her lieutenants, each taking responsibility for specific aspects of the household, while the boys handled outdoor chores and maintenance with a pride that came from being trusted with real responsibility. Eleanor continued teaching at the schoolhouse, but now her classroom extended far beyond those walls to include every moment of their shared lives. Evening meals became discussions of literature and arithmetic. Bedtime stories turned into history. Lessons and weekend adventures evolved into scientific observations and geographical explorations. She was raising not just children, but future citizens who would carry her values of hard work, education, and compassion into the wider world. Alex found his daily observations becoming an essential part of his own routine, though he was careful to maintain the respectful distance that Eleanor's independence seemed to require. Through Sam Rivers, he ensured that practical needs were met, winter coats appearing when the weather turned cold, medical care provided when little Emma fell ill, educational supplies delivered when the makeshift schoolroom needed expanding. But more than providing material support, Alex found himself genuinely invested in the success of this remarkable family, celebrating their achievements and worrying about their challenges as if they were his own. The connection between benefactor and recipient began to shift when Eleanor started leaving small notes of thanks with Sam Rivers, beautifully written expressions of gratitude that revealed not just her appreciation, but glimpses of her personality, her humor, and her thoughtful observations about life and learning. Alex treasured these communications, reading them multiple times, and crafting his own careful responses that gradually evolved from formal assistance into something approaching friendship. "Your kindness has given us more than material comfort," she wrote one autumn evening. "You have given us the gift of staying together, of growing as a family, and of proving that love truly can overcome any obstacle. I find myself wondering about the kind of person who would offer such generosity to strangers, and hoping that someday I might have the opportunity to express my gratitude in person." Alex's response was equally thoughtful. "Watching your family thrive has been the greatest reward I could imagine. Your strength, grace, and dedication inspire not just the children in your care, but everyone who has the privilege of witnessing your daily miracles. Perhaps the time has come for a more formal introduction." The exchange marked a turning point in their relationship, the beginning of a courtship conducted through letters and careful gestures, observed from a distance but felt deeply by both participants. The emotional connection between them deepened like a river cutting through stone, slowly, inevitably, and with a power that transformed everything it touched. Alex began finding excuses to ride past the cottage at times when he might encounter Eleanor, while she started taking evening walks with the children that happened to lead them near the borders of his property. Their first face-to-face conversation took place over a shared concern for young Catherine, who had shown signs of a serious fever that worried Eleanor despite Dr. Hartwell's reassurances. Alex had appeared at her door one evening, no longer hiding behind the anonymity that had defined their relationship, his face creased with genuine worry. "Sam tells me Catherine is ill," he said simply. "I wanted to offer whatever help might be needed." Eleanor's eyes widened with recognition and something deeper. Gratitude, respect, and the beginning of an attraction she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. She gestured for him to enter, leading him to where Catherine slept fitfully, while the other children gathered around with the protective concern that marked this family's deepest bond. Alex knelt beside the bed with surprising gentleness for such a large man, his weathered hand checking the child's fever with the experienced touch of someone who had cared for many sick animals and a few sick people. "She needs to break the fever," he said quietly. "There's a herb that grows in the high meadows. I could ride up tonight and bring it back." Eleanor's throat worked around words she couldn't speak, but her eyes said everything about her appreciation and growing affection. Instead, she reached for paper and pen, writing quickly, "You have already done so much for us, why?" Alex read her question and looked up to meet her gaze directly for the first time. "Because you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known," he said simply. "Because watching you love these children has taught me what real strength looks like. Because somewhere along the way I stopped thinking about helping strangers and started thinking about protecting my family." The word family hung in the air between them like a promise, and Eleanor felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with hope. She wrote again, her hand trembling slightly. "I don't even know your full name." Alex's smile was warm and genuine. "Alexander Sterling. And I've been hoping for months that you might allow me to court you properly, Miss Fairchild. With your permission and the children's approval, of course." Eleanor's smile was radiant as sunrise, and when she wrote yes on the paper, little Emma chose that moment to whisper sleepily, "Is that man going to be our new papa?" The innocence of the question and the hope in the child's voice seemed to settle something that had been uncertain between them, and Alex's gentle, "I'd like that very much," felt like the most natural promise in the world. The fragile happiness they'd built together faced its greatest test when Harold Grimsby returned 6 months later, armed with new paperwork, additional authority, and a determination to complete what he saw as his bureaucratic duty regardless of the human cost. His arrival coincided with the worst possible timing. Eleanor had been fighting a persistent illness that left her weaker than usual, while Alex was away on business in Santa Fe, unreachable and unaware of the crisis unfolding at home. "Miss Fairchild," Grimsby announced with the satisfaction of someone who believed he was finally going to impose proper order on an unacceptable situation, "I have new instructions from the territorial capital. The arrangement you've created, here while touching in its sentiment, is not sustainable or appropriate for the long-term welfare of these children." Eleanor's hands moved frantically in sign language that Grimsby ignored with practiced indifference, while the 12 children gathered around her with the protective instincts they'd developed over months of learning to function as a true family. "The older children will be placed in work programs where they can learn useful trades," Grimsby continued, consulting his clipboard with bureaucratic efficiency. "The middle children will go to established foster families, and the youngest will be sent to the territorial orphanage where they can receive proper institutional care." The words hit like physical blows, and Eleanor saw her worst nightmares taking shape in official documents and legal seals. Without Alex's financial support and protection, she had no way to fight the territorial authority that Grimsby represented. Worse, her recent illness had given him ammunition to argue that she was no longer capable of providing adequate care. "You have exactly 24 hours to prepare them for transfer," Grimsby announced. "Wagons will arrive tomorrow morning to begin the process. I trust you'll cooperate for the children's sake." That night was the longest of Eleanor's life, spent holding 12 sobbing children and trying to communicate through tears and gestures that this wasn't her choice, that she would fight if she could, that her love for them would never change regardless of where they were sent. Mary, the eldest at 16, took charge with heartbreaking maturity, helping pack belongings and trying to comfort the younger ones while her own world crumbled around her. "It's not fair," she whispered to Eleanor. "We're a family. Families should stay together." Eleanor could only nod and hold her tighter, her heart breaking with the knowledge that love, no matter how deep and pure, wasn't always enough to overcome the cold machinery of bureaucratic power. As dawn approached and the sound of wagons echoed across the prairie, Eleanor prepared to face the loss of everything that had given her life meaning. Unaware that Alex was riding hard toward home after receiving Sam Rivers's urgent telegram, determined to arrive before it was too late to save the family they'd all learned to love. What do you think matters more, the letter of the law or the spirit of love that creates real families? The confrontation that followed would be remembered in Silverdale for decades to come, not just for its drama, but for the way it revealed the true character of everyone involved. Alex arrived as Grimsby was literally loading children into wagons, his fury so palpable it seemed to change the very air around him. Eleanor had never seen him angry before, and the controlled rage that transformed his usually gentle features into something formidable made her realize that Alexander Sterling was far more powerful than she'd ever imagined. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Alex demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Grimsby straightened with the false bravado of a small man hiding behind official papers. "I'm carrying out territorial orders, Mr. Sterling. These children are being placed in more appropriate situations." Alex's smile was dangerous. "On whose authority?" "The territorial government, of course. I have all the proper documentation. You have paperwork signed by officials who have no jurisdiction over children whose care is being funded by a legal trust fund, administered through territorial courts," Alex interrupted, producing his own set of documents. "You also have no authority to remove children from a guardian who has been legally appointed by those same courts." Grimsby's confidence flickered. "I was told this woman had no legal standing. This woman has been legally appointed as guardian through adoption proceedings that were finalized last month," Alex continued, his voice growing quieter and more dangerous. "Adoption proceedings that I sponsored, funded, and saw through to completion with the full approval of Judge Morrison Blackthorne himself." Eleanor's eyes widened in shock. While she'd been struggling with illness, Alex had been working behind the scenes to ensure their family's legal protection, creating a framework that no territorial bureaucrat could challenge. "Furthermore," Alex continued, "as Miss Fairchild's husband-to-be and legal partner in these proceedings, I have every right to challenge any attempt to disrupt this family." The word husband-to-be sent a shock through Eleanor that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with joy. Without words, without formal proposals or elaborate courtship rituals, Alex was claiming her and the children as his family, making their bond legally unbreakable. Sheriff Cross, who had arrived with the wagons as a legal witness, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Mr. Grimsby, it appears your information was incomplete. These documents Mr. Sterling has provided supersede any territorial orders you might have received. The defeat was complete and absolute. Grimsby's authority evaporated in the face of legal documents that had been properly filed, properly witnessed, and properly sealed by courts with actual jurisdiction." The children, who had been crying and clinging to Eleanor in terror, began to realize that they weren't going to be separated after all. "This isn't over," Grimsby muttered as he climbed back into his official wagon. "I'll be filing a report about irregularities in these proceedings." Alex's smile was cold as winter. "Steele, please do. I'm sure Judge Blackthorne would be very interested to hear about territorial officials who operate outside their authority and attempt to break up legally recognized families. In fact, I think I'll mention your conduct in my next letter to the territorial governor." As the wagons departed empty and defeated, Eleanor found herself surrounded by 12 children who were laughing and crying simultaneously, their relief so profound it seemed to lift them all off the ground. But her eyes were on Alex, this man who had not only saved their family but claimed them as his own in the most public and permanent way possible. When he approached her with gentle steps and hopeful eyes, she didn't need words to communicate her answer to his unspoken proposal. Sometimes love speaks loudest in the moments when words aren't necessary at all. Justice had prevailed, but more than that, love had triumphed over bureaucracy, compassion had overcome indifference, and family had proven stronger than any attempt to tear it apart. As the dust settled from Grimsby's ignominious departure, The reality of what Alex had accomplished began to sink in for everyone involved. Not only had he provided financial support and legal protection, but he had created a framework that would keep their family together permanently, regardless of what future challenges might arise. "You adopted us?" little Emma asked, her 4-year-old mind trying to process the concept of legal guardianship, while her heart simply understood that they were safe. Eleanor knelt to the child's level, her hands moving in the gentle gestures that had become their family's second language. "We adopted each other," she signed, then looked up at Alex with eyes that held everything she couldn't say aloud. "All of us. We're a real family now." Alex's throat tightened with emotion as he surveyed the circle of children who had become as precious to him as if they'd shared his blood. "That's right," he said firmly. "All of us. Forever." The legal ceremonies that followed were surprisingly simple, given the complexity of emotions involved. Judge Blackthorne, who had watched the proceedings with genuine interest and approval, performed both the adoption finalizations and the marriage ceremony in his chambers, with all 12 children, serving as witnesses to the unions that made them officially and permanently a family. Eleanor's wedding dress was a simple blue gown that Mary and Sarah had sewn together, but Alex thought she'd never looked more beautiful than she did standing before the judge with 12 children clustered around them, her hands moving gracefully as she signed her vows since she couldn't speak them aloud. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish the family we've created together," her gestures said, and Alex's voice was thick with emotion as he spoke his own vows aloud for both of them to hear. The celebration that followed felt like the entire town's victory over injustice and narrow thinking. Mrs. McKinnon had organized a feast that lasted well into the evening, while Reverend Whitmore offered prayers of thanksgiving for the family that had been preserved and the love that had made it possible. Even Sheriff Cross admitted that he'd never seen justice served so thoroughly or with such obvious joy from everyone involved. As evening fell and the children finally settled into their beds that would never again be threatened by separation, Eleanor and Alex stood together on the porch of their expanded home, watching the stars emerge over the New Mexico territory sky. "I still can't believe it's real," Eleanor wrote on the slate she carried for communication. "6 months ago, I thought I might lose them all. Now we're married, they're all legally ours, and we have a future I never dared to dream of." Alex pulled her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms, how right it felt to call her his wife and those children their family. "I fell in love with your strength first," he said quietly. "Then your grace, your dedication, your incredible heart. But what made me know I wanted to marry you was watching you love those children as if they were your own from the very first moment." Eleanor's smile was radiant as she wrote her response. "They are our own. Love makes family, not blood. And I love you, Alexander Sterling, for understanding that from the beginning." 7 years later, the Sterling Ranch had become legendary throughout New Mexico territory, not just for its success and prosperity, but for the extraordinary family that called it home. The original 12 children had grown into remarkable young adults, each finding their own path while remaining connected to the home and values that had shaped them. Mary had become a teacher herself, taking over Eleanor's former position at the schoolhouse, while Sarah had married young Dr. Hartwell and started her own family. The boys had developed into skilled ranchers and tradesmen, their various talents contributing to the ranch's continued growth and success. Eleanor stood in the doorway of the expanded schoolhouse they'd built on the ranch property, watching Alex work with the youngest children on their arithmetic while baby Alexander, their miracle child born 2 years after their marriage, played contentedly in his cradle nearby. At 33, Eleanor had found her voice in ways she'd never imagined possible, teaching not just through sign language but through the example of a life lived with purpose, love, and unshakable determination. The mute teacher who had once doubted her ability to care for even one child had become the mother of 13, the heart of a community, and living proof that families are built through choice and sustained through love. Alex looked up from his lesson to catch her watching, and his smile still had the power to make her heart skip beats. The wealthy rancher who had once watched from afar had become her partner in every sense, sharing not just the burdens, but the daily joys of raising children who were now contributing to the world in ways that made their parents proud beyond measure. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, approaching her with the easy affection of a man who had found everything he'd ever wanted in the woman beside him. Eleanor reached for her slate, but instead of writing, she touched her throat and made a small sound, not quite a word, but close enough to one that Alex's eyes widened with hope and understanding. 7 years of love, security, and the confidence that came from being truly accepted had begun to unlock what trauma had sealed away. "Love," she whispered, the word barely audible but clearly formed. "I'm thinking about love." Alex's kiss tasted like joy and promises kept, like the miracle of second chances and the power of patience to heal even the deepest wounds. Around them, the sounds of family life continued. Children laughing, babies cooing, the everyday symphony of a home filled with love and purpose. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from grand gestures but from the quiet courage to keep loving, even when the world seems determined to tear families apart. And the most beautiful stories are written by ordinary people who choose to see possibilities where others see only problems.